I've read 2 books about EVE Online, 2 large books about different eras and wars and how a network of players created some of the most compelling emergent narratives in the history of video games. And even these 2 tomes, Empires of EVE, only scratch the surface of this remarkable online universe. EVE Online terrifies games journalists. There is so much to talk about, so much history, so many features, development lore, and player opinions, that to try and sum up in an article, a video essay, or dare I even say it, a podcast, is basically a fool's errand. But there is also something impossibly alluring about EVE Online, the Icelandic space capitalism MMO that for over 21 years has captured the imagination of both players and casual observers like myself. The player corporations that have grown and fallen, the politics between the player base and the developers, the switch to free-to-play, how both veteran and new players are constantly shifting the design of the game, and the studio's years-long up-and-down journey to make a AAA first-person shooter based within the EVE universe. Talking to one person about all of this would be impossible, so instead we talk to, well, 2. Bergur Finnbogason, creative director of EVE Online, and CCP CEO Hilmar Pétursson. If you'd have told me 21 years ago that EVE would still be around, I would have believed it. And I think if you had asked me, oddly enough, if World of Warcraft would have been, I probably would have said no. But there's something about EVE Online that just felt, not necessarily that it was perfect, but that it was so established and was doing something so unique and so ever-present that I could imagine people still wanting to do this in 21 years. Obviously, the game has changed a lot over those years. You guys have gone free to play. Game playing has changed a lot, but it still very much felt, I recently went back and played a bunch of it, it still very much felt similar in the wonder that I felt when I played it back in, when I was in college. In what ways do you guys think it has changed the most in those, 21 years or so? I think, Bergur, you've been with the company for 15 or so. How much has it changed? Obviously, for me, that new player experience, I never got into that nullsec post-game, craziness. That was always a bit... I read the books for that. But in what ways do you think the game has changed the most since it was launched?
Well, maybe before we go into that, you have more foresight than we did. If you had that foresight 21 years ago, you're more prophetic than we were. Our wildest expectations were that 150,000 people would play the game, and it will go on for 5 years.
Right.
This was literally our business plan. So here we are 21 years later with, I think, 22 million people that have played EVE since then, and an extended 60 million people have played all the different EVE games we've done ever since.
This sounds ridiculous. Like, who would ever think of this? It's really inspired by this guy, Reynir Harðarson, who founded CCP. And as he has said in this quote, venturing on a project so massive in scope, so unprecedented and unproven in so many ways is either done by madmen or idiots. We were probably both. And there he's just talking about EVE Online.
So I think what has maybe changed the game the most is probably the culture and the community around the game that has built up, which was the hypothesis in the beginning. The company even made that board game to kind of test high level the thesis, something called the Danger game. We have since republished 10 years ago as a game that anyone can play, because the original game is only in Icelandic, kind of limits the audience, but still was like quite a phenomenon. It was sold like 10,000 copy in a country of 80,000 households.
Wow.
So EVE Online still has some work to do to reach that market penetration. Yeah, and I think what has changed the most is the community and the culture that is developed around the game, and how big of a part that has become, and our sort of relationship to facilitate that. When the game became alive was kind of when the sort of blood started pumping through its veins, which were the players. So you could have maybe saved us a bit of angst if you had this conviction 21 years ago.
Blissful ignorance, optimism, perhaps, is where it comes from.
Yeah. Well, we certainly have plenty of that just to even try in the first place to make a game in a country that's never made a game, and make that game EVE Online of all games.
give me a breakdown of the size of CCP now and where you guys are based. I know there's sort of like 3 main studios. Is the work distributed among them? Are they mostly working on their own projects?
CCP is 400 people in 3 studios. We are largely organized around games taking place in its office. So here in London, where I sit, we're working on the Vanguard, the shooter. Our Shanghai team is taking care of the Chinese version of EVE Online, working with NetEase on Echoes and making EVE Galaxy Conquest. EVE Online obviously reigns supreme in Iceland, where we have the unique stat of 1 in every 1,000 people in Iceland works on EVE Online, which is an interesting perspective on the impact of a game of a nation.
Okay. Is EVE Online the biggest cultural export in terms of media? Although you were kind of like, I feel like us and Iceland, in Ireland and Iceland, we both had Game of Thrones for a while there as well.
So Iceland does export quite a bit of culture. Not only did we write the original sagas about Vikings 1,000 years ago, we also have like a Nobel Prize winner in literature. We of course have Björk, and we have EVE Online. So it's a tough competition. But now that the decades have added up on EVE, EVE has edged out everything else. So I do indeed think we hold the title of the biggest sort of export from Iceland when it comes to culture, and that is eclipsing like the Rosetta and some epic things. And there actually was an important milestone crossed at some point last year, where the number of game developers working in Iceland, like we became not 50%.
All right.
Like we are now, not the majority of game developers in Iceland works for CCP. Like we're slightly less than half of game developers in Iceland work for CCP. That was a big milestone.
Presumably, I guess the post-COVID remote work sort of stuff helped that as well, I imagine.
No, it's just the robustness of the gaming industry in Iceland.
Wow.
Like we're very sort of much pushing for like an industry association, etc. We started that in 2009, and now we reached the milestone where there are more game developers in Iceland working outside of CCP than inside of CCP, and we are actually quite proud in having played a part in that happening.
Yeah. Has, just from a culture perspective, obviously we all now live in the 21st century, and, this is definitely the case in Ireland where, I moved abroad, but my parents' generation weren't doing that, and certainly my grandparents' generation weren't doing that. Is it similar in Iceland, or was there more sort of exploring the boundaries? Because you guys are like geographically fairly isolated from most of Europe.
Yeah, so I mean, up till the independence of Iceland in 1944, people definitely stayed in Iceland, and Iceland was a relatively poor country in kind of the grander scheme of things. But we have a beautiful word for the word stupid in Icelandic, which is heimskur, and it kind of roughly translates to the one that always stays at home. And if you don't see the world, you become stupid. So it's very ingrained in Icelanders to travel and to see the world and to kind of try to experience things outside this wonderful rock in the middle of the North Atlantic that's constantly trying to kill you. And is this maybe, that actually plays a part in kind of the seed of EVE Online, this longing to see something beyond kind of our closest surrounding, and trying to build communities based on, of course, what we know, which is the harshness and the darkness and the grittiness and the constant trying to kill you, but in a way trying to kind of expand that horizon further.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a parallel there for sure. Is there a culture of people playing games in Iceland? And if it is, where do people end up playing? Is it consoles, PC, mobile? So
historically, playing games and telling stories and singing and playing music is a very ingrained thing culturally. Like there's a lot of telltales are very common, and the old sagas is a big part of our upbringing. Like we're lucky in that way that because of our isolation, the language of course developed, but it's at the core it's very similar to how the language was spoken 1,000 years ago. So we can actually, as a kid, you can actually go and to the National Library and read the old scripts, and you kind of understand them. So sitting in an old Icelandic house, in the 1500s, you would play games and tell stories and, tell ghost stories and horror stories to scare the living death out of everyone. That element of creativity and kind of passing time is very ingrained in us. So playing video games is a very natural next step, I feel, in that progress in many ways. So gaming is it's quite big in Iceland and popular, absolutely. And I think, like, following kind of suit with the rest of the world, gaming has become way more a part of our everyday life. You pay your bills in your internet bank, and you get like a little like pop-up, hey, congratulations, you did well. So even if people fight against it, like we're all kind of getting closer to that life being a game mode.
Yeah, I just came back from a gym that does something very similar to gamify me and like the pigeon hitting the Skinner box button. Keep me there for the good of my health, at least. One of the questions I always love asking studios, especially in Europe, is which studio do you hire from the most, or get hired, or people leave and go to the most? And usually I can guess kind of maybe one or two where they might. But EVE is such a unique game that I'm struggling. Do you guys is there any other place that people sometimes come from or go to and come back when it comes to the core team in Iceland?
So, I mean, there have been waves of companies which have been sort of moving into the space of live service games, and they have come up over these 20 years. And you can just sort of trace their thinking a bit, like, who are you going to call? Like, right. You're going to call somebody that has worked on EVE Online. Like, if you want to build a live service game, where do you go? Like, what is the Dwarf Fortress of live service games?
Right.
There have been waves of companies that come up and have been calling a lot of CCP people. And I mean, they're generally, I would say, anyone that's worked at CCP can almost like walk into any gaming company with just having been at CCP for some years. That is almost like a calling card by now. I would almost say it's something we're proud of. Come to CCP, you will learn extremely marketable talents and skills from working on EVE Online. It's in many ways the toughest gig you can have in gaming. Where we recruit from, I think that is a lot more diverse. Often we need more specialization in very sort of precise, often in technical art, UX, actually normal computer game design. Often, like, there's like some of the normal stuff we actually are shockingly bad at because we have to do everything our own way, kind of. But what has, I think, been by far the most productive way to hire people into CCP has been the intern program. And if I look at, like, quote unquote, the crop of the intern program, like some of the people which are now shining stars at CCP, you can trace their beginning from the intern program.
Yeah. And I mean, we're definitely the biggest player in Iceland when it comes to game making. But over the last, 20 years, mostly over the last 10 years, we've been focusing a lot on helping the Icelandic gaming industry to grow. And we have a lot of former CCPs that have now gone into and building their own studios, both here in Iceland and elsewhere. Because we know that the more gaming studios we have in Iceland, the more lively the industry becomes here. We feel more pressure, and the conversation becomes more active, and also it becomes way easier for us to get the specialists that we need to move to Iceland. Because if it doesn't work out with CCP, then we have other studios to catch you, and this has kind of been our mentality. Like, yes, of course we try to keep our cards close to our chest, but I mean, no one is going to go and steal our community. No one is going to go and come and steal our economy. So we tend to be relatively open about kind of how we work, and we try to be quite honest and transparent. So we've, even in the past, when we see that, okay, here's someone that's going kind of live service with their games and they sit close by, rather than them kind of coming and poaching all of our developers, we just kind of open up a line to them and like, okay, how can we help you? How can we like share some of our learnings and do like proper knowledge exchanges with companies to kind of help them take these steps? And that has oftentimes resulted in fantastic relationships and helped EVE Online grow even further.
Imagine starting a job at a game studio and there being 21 years of development history behind it. Imagine being a player and wanting to start playing a game with 21 years of community lore you have to catch up on. EVE Online provides serious logistical problems when it comes to onboarding, not just for players, but for the staff of the developers too. So how has the leadership at CCP handled this over the years? And how difficult is it to update and maintain a codebase that was started over 2 decades ago? Especially for an MMO, which needs to be online 24/7. What I found fascinating talking to you guys about this as well is that a lot of these are problems that you just don't get unless your game has been around for 20 years. Like the fact that, like you said, you might have an intern come in who wasn't born when EVE launched, and that like it's impossible for them to get to that stage. It's also a tricky thing when it comes to new players, I imagine, because you've created this, the ceiling will probably never be high enough for the hardcore player who wants to keep going, right? You're trying to create, I know with the new expansion as well, the new update, you're trying to like redevelop null-second ways to try and, create more dynamic gameplay there as well. But for the new player coming in, there's this sort of gap that exists that just has to kind of exist with a game that old in terms of probably playtime, obviously experience and knowledge and stuff like that. But I also think with EVE, there's like a perceived gap. Like EVE is talked about sort of by many people in the same way that games like, I think, that are far more complex, like Dwarf Fortress, for instance. EVE to me is not necessarily that complicated. It just has some idiosyncrasies that you sort of have to learn that you maybe not be used to from other games. How do you guys balance that whole thing of trying to make sure that your player who's been playing for 5 years, 10 years, 2 years, whatever it is satiated, while also not trying to create a game that is difficult or is even perceived to be more difficult than it is for new players to come in?
You hit the nail on the head there. There's definitely it is complex. It's complex in a sense where you have like every option imaginable almost. You can do and be whoever you want to be, and you can like it's a sandbox. So we provide the tools for you to tell your own stories and be the person that you aspire to be. And that is a very daunting thing. That is a very daunting task. And kind of entering this universe is like, okay, do I want to be an explorer, or do I want to be a ruler of a big empire, or do I want to be a lone dog in wormhole space? Like almost no one does everything.
Right.
Most people like find their path and they find their niche, and they might try multiple paths before kind of finding what they are. And this is something like, this is almost more of a PR problem than a kind of a design problem. Especially the fact that like people feel like, it's a game, I need to collect all the trophies to win it. Like winning EVE is a beautiful debate that we can take that will probably span like multiple hours of hot debate, and people have very different views of what the winning state of EVE Online is. But we've been focusing a lot over the last few years to really kind of be better at teaching people the core competencies, the core elements of being able to, so you can play the game properly or efficiently. And then we spent a lot of time and effort in kind of getting people to start playing with others. We know that like the second you start flying with others, the moment you start to kind of contribute to a bigger purpose or a bigger organization, like that's really when EVE Online starts. That moment where you have like human to human interactions. And the moment you kind of you get into a social group where you can, you feel like you have a purpose and you feel like you have a place, like that's where the power and the beauty of the game happens. So that we've been spending a lot of effort in like, okay, how can we get you ready to take the step into a player organization, and how can we connect you and player organizations back together? This will continue to be your process, and this is a problem that we will never fully solve, but incrementally we'll be better and better at this.
So it's interesting. It actually never has been easier to start the online than right now. I just finished my sort of annual new player run through earlier this year. The entry has been improved a lot. kind of the little adventure you have in the beginning, the overall guidance of the game on what you should do, then there's an extremely interesting side effect. It's because people have been talking on the internet about EVE Online for over 20 years. A lot of the training data for all the large language models is based on discourse around EVE Online.
Oh, that's funny.
So what I did, I made ChatGPT kind of a mentor for myself. I just asked ChatGPT what I should be doing next. And oh my God, it was so good. And I was like, okay, I've been doing this. What should I do next? Well, you should look into that ship. Oh, what should I fit? Well, you should fit that. Well, I'm missing this. How should I fix it? Well, you should do this. All spot on. And oh my God, I had so much fun just having ChatGPT coach me on how to play EVE Online. And this is actually something we will probably eventually get more into the experience. But in the meantime, you can kind of have a little co-pilot playing EVE Online with you. And even, I know a little bit about the game. I'm like Bergur. We don't hold the candle to some extreme EVE players, but I've played my thousands of hours of EVE Online over my 20 years of working on this. But still, doing it with ChatGPT as a co-pilot, oh my God, it was so much fun.
It's funny you mention that as well, because I feel like CCP over the years have been on the bleeding edge of sort of numerous software and hardware things. I know you have a A16Z funded team that's working on some sort of blockchain stuff as well. And you mentioned ChatGPT, and some of these things, especially if you start going on Reddit and online, you do start getting pushback from players, right? Ethical arguments against stuff like blockchain, AI is a big conversation at the moment when it comes to mostly sort of, I feel like, jobs within the industry being taken away and stuff like that. How important is it for CCP to be on the bleeding edge of some of these things in terms of, interest within the organization, in terms of funding? And how do you balance that with that sort of, again, that pushback that can exist, but online and perhaps also in your studios? I don't know.
So I think you rattled off like quite a bit of different things. I can summarize all that like, with great power comes great responsibility. Usually when you're looking at these pieces of technology, when ethical questions come into play is because they are powerful. And something which is powerful can be used for good and bad. I think we are, and it's obviously my own opinion, we're largely trying to use whatever technologies we have explored to do a good thing. Like we don't nail it out the park in every one shot. But I think we are generally trying to build on the relatively strong and beautiful aspects of EVE Online, where it does nurture friendship in a way like nothing else we've seen, the emotional sort of impact the game has on you in a deep way, which I think is generally a good thing. The fact that people can explore aspects of their persona, learn new skills, step out of their comfort zone, learn deep secrets about themselves in very tough circumstances created by the game. I think these are all good things. So finding new techniques and technologies to kind of further that sort of emotional impact for people to connect, etc. That is the goal, why we have been sort of intrepid pioneers, kind of jumping on many new things and figuring out, can we use this to make better games? And I can understand that people are concerned about many of these things because they are powerful. Just like, I was very much in the early internet. We were making the metaverse back in 96 using VRML, etc. I actually remember these moments where people were inventing terms about something that I've been doing for decades. Okay, that's a cool way to call it that. Right?
That was actually great when both the metaverse kind of hype happened like a year ago and blockchain kind of conversation really started a few years ago. I clearly remember kind of conversation with Hilmar. We were like, wait, they're just talking about this? Isn't this what we've been doing for 20 years? Oh, we didn't have a word for it. Okay, I guess it's called metaverse.
And then there was like cloud games for a while, and it was like, cloud games? What are they talking about? Oh, they're talking about having a server.
Yeah.
Server for the game. And we call it the cloud. Okay.
Novel.
And then there was like forever games. What are they calling about? Like forever.
Yeah.
like eForever. Like we've been saying this I mean, the internet was a scary thing in the beginning, and people were talking very similarly about the internet. It took a good decade for the internet itself to prove that it was useful for something. I mean, it was largely just looked at as a fringe activity and a bubble that burst at some point, like when we were trying to finish EVE Online in kind of 21, 22, and 23. I mean, my God, no, 2002. I mean, people wouldn't touch us with a 10-foot pole. Like, it was like being an Icelandic banker in 2009 was the crash. Like being an internet worker in Iceland was generally just like frowned upon. But I think from the experience of having somewhat figured out the internet when it was a ghetto, then we just have a bit of a perpetuity of like, okay, people are afraid of technology, then maybe we should go and check it out. Maybe it can be used for good.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's a lot of kind of on the mechanical side that has changed and just evolved throughout the years. 21 years is a huge amount of time. I think the recommended spec for EVE Online when it first came out was you had to be on a 56.6 kilobit modem. Which, if I ask my kid today, he has no idea what that means. And we've had huge changes in how people communicate, how people interact, how people use hardware. I mean, when the first iPhone came out in 2007, so like everything flipped on its head, like UX became a thing overnight. So of course there's a lot that has changed, but yeah, I mean, it's a I don't know how often I've heard like, oh, this is end of humanity. MySpace, end of humanity and human communication. We always end up just wanting to chat to each other and, share funny cat videos and just cry and laugh together. And I always feel like, we're failing when the community is talking about CCP. And my ultimate thing is like, I don't even want players to talk about the systems of the game. I want them to talk about the outcomes of the system. And that's similar to, that being AI or VR or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. If a VR set is the best medium to tell the story that you're trying to tell, use VR. If AI is the best way to tell the story, use AI. It shouldn't be about the tool. It's about the emotions and the feelings it generates, and that's the magic sauce.
You both touched on the community stuff, and I was thinking about this as I was just sort of spending some time on the Reddit and watching YouTube videos, and I've always checked in on the sort of like, I feel like it's, in a way, it reminds me of Dwarf Fortress, where there are people who play that game, and then there are people who sort of play the game by hearing stories about the game, and that to me has been a big way in which I've enjoyed EVE over the past 2 decades. While I've jumped in, I've loved hearing about it a lot as well. You guys are in a very unique position where you have 20 years of players, and you might have the same thing that a lot of games have, where you have 20 years of people who have played the game, but at some stage decided not to play anymore, either because they had their fill, because they had, grew up and had families maybe, and didn't have as much time, moved away from PC gaming, whatever it is. How difficult is it to listen to feedback when there is this growing number of people who will sort of probably never come back for reasons that are outside of your control, who are also maybe negative voices, you know what I mean? That you have to sort of like listen to, but also you have to find the signal and noise between those people and people who are, maybe might come back or have feedback that is a bit more relevant to your dev team.
Yeah, so I mean, this is obviously a big topic in the industry overall. Like the angry people on the internet is like a force of nature when it comes to any live service, game development, frankly, any game development. And we obviously got like a preview to this quite early on. Like we're running alphas on EVE sort of 2001. And I think we very quickly developed the intuition that listening too much to people through the internet was maybe not the most productive thing.
So, I mean, this is something that we live day in and day out for the last 21 years. So we have a lot of experience in kind of deciphering this feedback. We have great tools at our hand and wonderful institutions like the Council of Stellar Management, or the CSM, which is a player-elected board, 10 to 12 players that come to Iceland and sit down with us for a full week and debate the game and talk about everything. And we have weekly meetings with them, and we talk a lot with them, and they are kind of our conduit into the community. We're relatively transparent and quite open and accessible to the community. We try to kind of, when we have fan events, we make sure that, we expose our developers and we're open to conversations, and we go out drinking with people and have great bar conversations. But this is always a very difficult and risky thing when new developers join CCP. This is usually one of the big hurdles that they have to go through is the first feature you put out. Please don't fall into the the Reddit rabbit hole or the YouTube comment rabbit hole, because it will eat you alive. And you need training, and you need to look at all feedback critically. And some of it is fantastic. Some of it is just angry.
And this actually was the impetus why FanFest was created.
Right.
I remember very distinctly sitting somewhere at the old CCP office early sort of 2004, and we were like, oh my God, like, can't we just invite these people over and talk it out rather than have this very dysfunctional way to talk together? And we did have a FanFest later that year. And I mean, in the beginning, everything was very raw around Team Online, both the love and the hate and the angst, and like there was a lot of emotions also in us. We were younger than we're now, and it was just a lot to take on. And we were like, frankly, a little sort of timid about like, okay, meeting all these people, 300 people have booked tickets to Iceland. Some people have taken out the passport for the first time in their life. People are coming here like with some serious intent. And we were just like, ooh, how is this going to pan out? And also there were deep in-game rivalries. Like, are this going to be like, I don't know, sort of LA rapper gangs, or like, well, how is this going to really play out? And what just ensued was just one big love fest around Team Online and everything around it. Everyone extremely productive and polite, extremely. And I can hand to heart say, in my now 20-ish to 22 years of talking to e-players in person around the world, in every single imaginable circumstance, nobody has been rude or angry to me in person. Nobody ever.
So I've got a present. Hilmar, I need you to collect this from me.
It's beautiful.
Thank you guys. I love Eve. I love coming to the FanFest. Let's hope it goes on for many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
People have been passionate, and they have had like deep-seated things they need to communicate, but it's all been pleasant interactions. The online interactions make stuff best, but everything in person. So the fact that once me and Bergur traveled the world together in a part in 2019, we went to like, I don't know, 9 different cities when we took FanFest on the road. Yeah. Everywhere around the world, nothing but kind and awesome people. So I would encourage anyone that is feeling down about the written word about your game, focus on like meeting people in person. I would dare you. You will seldomly be faced with a kind of often extremely pointed sort of frankly vitriol that people are sort of unleashing. Sometimes for like justifiable reasons. It's not all been pretty. But how like angry it becomes often maybe has more to do with people's own emotional state rather than your word per se.
And you have to kind of slowly, with time, you kind of learn what to take in and what to kind of put in the later category or possibly the never category. So the funny thing is, like we find this very normal, and it's a big part of kind of how we develop and how we communicate internally and how we kind of conduct ourselves. But sometimes what's normal for one is completely alien for the next. So oftentimes we have to kind of calibrate.
And this has led us to kind of more look at overall aggregate sentiment. And we have several ways where we have teams of people that aggregate together kind of the opinions and the feelings to create some basis of fact. And while it's taken us a while to get to this place, it's like, it helps so much, like coming into it now, because like imagine being an intern starting your first gaming job at CCP and you're faced with these players who know this game. It's like, to an end you can never aspire to achieving.
Yeah, it's sorry, go ahead, Bergur.
Sorry, just to add to that, I think it's a super important point that Hilmar is touching on there. I don't even pretend that I know the game as well as some of our players know it. Like, there are players that know every single corner of their solar system. They know all the nitty-gritty stories, and a tiny change to the system just turns their world upside down. And this is something that we need to respect. And sometimes changes need to happen, and we're not afraid of change, but you have to get kind of the deeper context, and you have to realize that you are playing with people's lives in many ways. Like that's EVE Online is real, and that's what we all aspire to
and
do.
I think this element, okay, I signed up to be a game developer, I ended up being a politician. you gain an appreciation what it is to be a politician.
Absolutely.
We're a little bit like the city government. Like, people are just never happy.
Over the years, CCP have flirted with extending the borders of the EVE universe, from virtual reality title EVE Valkyrie to Dust 514, a highly ambitious online shooter in which the players would battle in planet-sized EVE wars connected to the wider game. The latest project, EVE Vanguard, is what the team is calling an online sci-fi sandbox FPS.
The vision for Vanguard is a true MMO FPS. It's a long-term vision, and we want to follow the footsteps of EVE Online, our MMO that we've been building for over 2 decades.
Vanguard is the latest version in a long line of FPS projects, many of which have never been talked about publicly before. So what is the motivation behind this push for an FPS? And what is it about the first-person genre that's making it so hard to stick the landing? Switching over back to mainland, well, I was about to say mainland Europe, but England's not exactly mainland Europe, unless you count the Channel Tunnel. EVE Vanguard, there's sort of, there's I know you guys have your playtests, it's sort of like an extended friends and family, it's like friends and community betas going on and stuff, but it is for the most part largely behind closed doors at the moment. I find this fascinating because Dust 514 was a project that I just, from a conceptual level, I just absolutely adored. And you guys did it, and you put it out, and it ran and for a number of years and had a healthy number of people playing it. But obviously, from a technical perspective, maybe didn't quite reach the sort of where you were trying to get with it. With Vanguard, how much are you building off of stuff you learned on Dust 514? And in what ways is it easier to make this type of game in 2024 than maybe it was, 10 years ago, whenever it was that Dust started development?
So we've learned a lot, and we're taking a lot of these learnings from Dust days. We've done development of a first-person shooter has since Dust, we sunset Dust. Like, there has been some development of a first-person shooter at CCP ongoing almost the whole time. So we've taken a lot of learnings from all these iterations. It's maybe hard to kind of pick one, but I think the kind of touching on the point that I talked about earlier about kind of trusting specialists and hiring specific teams and really investing in a strong team to build this game, and then kind of using our time into kind of really finding that core EVE DNA and making sure that kind of shines through. Those are kind of the key elements in the development of the game. And I think not spending our time trying to implement Python into the engine or doing kind of techno stuff, but more kind of, okay, how can we lean on what's known and kind of the established language of first person shooters and how they're built, and then kind of how can we then spend our hours on giving it the true EVE Online sandbox flavor and kind of make it smell and taste and feel like proper EVE experience. So that's kind of, I think, on a high level, that's kind of our approach, and not saying that this hasn't necessarily been the approach before, but now it's just that view has sharpened even further.
Yeah, and the legacy of Dust is enormous. Like we all that have been around the block, like Bergur and I, have people stalking us on any social media available, pestering us to bring back Dust. So, and this is some of the most ardent community we've seen around any game. Like for a while, the Discord around Dust, a decade after the fact, was one of the biggest Discord around any EVE game. And Dust did many amazing things. I think we had about 8 million people play it. It's still in presentations from Sony about like top performing free-to-play games, certainly on the PlayStation 3. Dust was a huge game. And fitting it onto the PlayStation 3 did take longer than we expected. So it came out later than planned, and it was kind of at the tail end of the platform. It was very close to the PS4 coming out.
And a difficult platform to develop for as well, you know.
Yes, it was a big game on a it took a lot of effort to make it fit, and we got there in the end. And it did perform in many ways quite amazingly, but we decided to sunset it, and we looked at many ways. Are we porting it? Are we upgrading it? And we tried all of it. So we have, like Bergur say, we've done 7 pivots about like how to slice the vision, the big vision that is laid out, and you can just watch EVA Future Vision on YouTube from 2011. Like nothing has really changed. It's just like, okay, is it a horizontal slice? Is it a vertical slice? Are we focusing on this in the beginning and getting to this place? It has taken us a while to find the good path. But now we have the path, and the path is Vanguard.
While developing Vanguard, this has been our mantra. One game, one community, one team.
Vanguard is connected to EVE Online from day one.
At CCP, we know firsthand the importance of community, which is why we're showing you this now. We're committed to building and growing EVE Vanguard side by side with you, the EVE community.
But I think what has remained ever true is this idea of your next shot could topple an empire. Still hasn't been realized by anyone, anywhere, since there was Dust. And I think that resonates with everyone. Like the deja vu of just like doing the same thing over and over with no persistent impact other than climbing a ladder somewhere or winning a tournament. You're not really shaping a universe. You're not taking part in a grand social experiment. I think that has resonated throughout the decades. And there's a monumental update coming now on the 20th of June with a Solstice event, which I personally am extremely excited in participating in. And also just seeing, like, we have held back a lot. I think we're releasing something like 6 months worth of development, if not more.
Right.
And I think once people experience that, I think it will become a lot clearer where this game is going. And it really is going after this big vision of kind of one universe, one war, many games all coming together in some, like, if EVE Online wasn't enough, like, well, got something for you now.
How important is it, I guess, from a management perspective, I guess, because game developers are creative people. When you work on one game, perhaps, for decades and decades, maybe that's something that some people really like. I can imagine a world in which there's some people who want to mix it up, maybe learn a different skill, maybe work in a different type of game. You guys have obviously had those avenues. You've had multiple projects going on. Is that part of it at all? Is there like a sort of, or does it sort of build organically within an organization that there is sort of a thirst to do something, stretch a different muscle, as it were?
So I think if we look at CCP as an employer of people, the fact that we have a lot going on generally makes the company itself more exciting to work for. If the only thing we're doing is just EVE Online, then there are just less dimensions. And the more dimensions you have, the more opportunity there are to capture people with different interests at different stages of their life, etc. It also does serve in, like, some people that might have worked on EVE Online for a decade or so, to maybe try something new. It certainly plays a part in that. I think generally just having more things going on creates more a vibrant environment where teams are also learning from each other. There might be some cool thing done on EVE Galaxy Conquest or Awakening or EVE Online, which people are maybe trying to tweak a bit and you try it out on another game. So I think there's sort of the collective ability of the company to learn increases the more things you have going on. Also within EVE itself, I mean, even EVE itself is a mixture of many different projects going on at the same time. Some of them are more risky, some of them more about polish and taking care of things which maybe have been left astray for a while. So like all this activity across the company adds up to a beautiful whole where there's sort of symphony effect of all these things going on, builds a greater capacity for the company to make every game a better game.
Yeah, and I think one of the core missions of the company is EVE Forever. That's what we strive for, and we want EVE Online to outlive us all. So we structure the company, we structure the development team very much in this kind of marathon mentality. So we're not in kind of short. I mean, of course, when we need to crunch, we crunch, and when we need to sprint, we sprint. But we try to construct the development team and how we hire people and how we retain people with that kind of longevity in mind. So we have quite high tenure here at CCP, and we try to make sure that, like, hey, if people are feeling tired in their current role, like, okay, what is a progression? Is there an opportunity to change teams or change project? And right now we're actually running on 2 expansions a year, and we allow people to float between kind of initiatives or kind of bigger projects as needed and as they feel like their value is best kind of represented.
You probably answered the question there to some degree, but a lot of games have tried to do the sort of massive space battle thing. You go back to games like MAG, massive action game. Obviously, Star Citizen is attempting to do something in this way too. In a way, Helldivers too sort of, gave people, especially the social aspect of fighting towards, a front line of a war that is moving in some way. Why do you think players are excited by this idea? Because, like you said, nobody's quite realized it yet. We've had different flavors and different shades of it, and it does seem like something that is incredibly difficult to build. But why do you think people are fascinated by it? Why do you think there's a thirst for gamers for that type of experience?
So I think, a lot of human life is about stories. And when you have a persistent universe, what you do, it matters, and it stays, and it becomes a part of the story. The story of EVE Online literally is made and written by the players of EVE Online.
What the fuck exploded?
One of the apostles.
Holy shit.
Okay,
Like when you read the Empires of EVE Volume 1 and 2, it's not really about CCP or me and Bergur doing dev stuff. It is about EVE Alliance shenanigans spanning the decades, to a point where an actual journalist / historian had to put it together. Even if you have a database with all this, it's just like figuring it out so that you can narrate the story. But it's backed up by facts that are in the world. And we can check, legit, that happened. It was like that. It checks out. And I think there is something magical of offering people a playground where they can write their own stories.
I love writing about EVE Online. You can't make this stuff up. It wouldn't be fun if you did.
And me and Bergur are going to do our best to be just not in the way, just here to clean up the mess and maybe fix the swings once in a while. But you are the stars. We're the janitors. That is an extremely aspiring thing to take part in. That what you do in EVE Online echoes in eternity. And I think that's why we're here talking about the game decades later, and we're talking about adding more games to it to connect into this infinitely scalable storytelling engine that is New Eden.
So let's try again. So it's going to be 3, 2, 1, EVE Forever. Okay. 3, 2, 1, EVE Forever!
Earlier this summer, CCP released the Equinox update for EVE, making some fundamental changes to the way the game plays, especially in nullsec, the most dangerous areas of the universe. You can read all about it and download the game for free over at eveonline.com. Thanks to Bergur and Hilmar for talking to me for this episode. Massive thanks to Jesse Garasha for producing all of these episodes, and to you for listening, especially if you've just moved over from the Dear Dwyery feed to this, the main NoClip feed. To support this podcast, the Crewcast, and the many documentaries we work on every year, head over to patreon.com/noclip and pick a tier. For instance, if you signed up to the $5 tier, you get access to a monthly update show, a backlog of behind-the-scenes videos going back years, and our exclusive Discord. And more importantly, you'll be helping us document game development for years to come. Thanks again for listening to this episode. See you next time.